Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Rangers, the Banter Years, a series from the Terrace Scottish podcast that explores Rangers' adventures in the lower leagues and beyond. My name is Craig Telfer and right now I am joined by my close associate Shaughan McGuigan.
Hello there.
And we're rewinding to the 2012-13 season where Rangers had been denied entry to begin the campaign in the First Division and instead had to compete in the basement tier, the Third Division. The last episode focused on the summer of 2012 when the company voluntary agreement was rejected by the HMRC. The club were liquidated, so we're picking up where they left off and talking about their first forays in the lower leagues and their start in the Third Division. It was a period that I remember well, Shaughan. You and I were working on the Telfer and Shaughan website, site dedicated to lower league Scottish football. And what a time to kick it off.
I did not expect them to be quite as funny as they were. I actually expected them to be like not funny. I thought they would just like sweep everybody away, and that was very much not the case.
Yes, I think a lot of people thought that would indeed happen. That Rangers would. I think there was even bookmakers taking bets that Rangers would win every league game this season or go the season unbeaten, and that certainly didn't happen. It turned out to be quite a frustrating campaign ultimately successful because the team got into became the SPFL rebranded and then became League One. So they ultimately got promoted into the tier above. So ultimately it was successful. But in terms of like developing young players, having a coherent strategy to take the team forward, that wasn't the case. I do appreciate there was a lot of stuff going on in the background in the club, that the club were being really poorly run in that period, which perhaps prevented that. But nevertheless, I think you've got to look at this season as a qualified success, all in.
So that wasn't a concern, I suppose. But that I don't know if you're aware, but the team with the most goals scored in a league season in Britain is Wraith Rovers. Something like 154 goals in 34 games, something like that. And it was the kind of late 40s. I was like, this record is definitely going. Rangers will surely score 4 or 5 every single week in the second division, and they'll take that record. For not that it really matters. But that was my one concern. And then I saw them in the first game of the season against Brecon. Was it Challenge Cup?
Yeah.
I was like, my goodness, these boys are hopeless.
Yeah, well, I think that before we go and look at the game, Shaughan, do you want to... Well, it was Ally McCoist. We'll basically talk about the manager, talk about the squad, and then work through the first couple of games. Basically, Shaughan and I, in this podcast, we're not going to be looking at the whole season. We're just going to be looking at the first couple of games there, how Rangers adjusted to life in the Third Division, and some of the key matches and key results that happened during that period. Before we do it, Ally McCoist was the manager. He had replaced Walter Smith, going into, I think this is his second full season as manager. Very difficult time for the club, and I think that to try and galvanise a group of players and group of supporters when there's so much chaos happening, I think he's perhaps the right man for the job. And for all his faults, that he wasn't a particularly good tactician. I think that he was using a hammer to crack a walnut in terms of some of his signings that he brought in a lot of money. I mean, they spent like £700,000 to sign David Templeton from Hearts, for instance. But that's money they perhaps didn't have at that period. But ultimately, I think that he was a good figurehead for Rangers at that period.
No, I would disagree. No, I would disagree. He feels like the Scottish equivalent of Kevin Keegan, like a kind of cheerleader. So yes, you might want him as some kind of figurehead of your club, but I don't think you necessarily want him to be in the dressing room, picking the starting 11 and dictating how they play a game. I thought he was a dreadful manager, but we disagree on that, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose I was just thinking at the time, I remember actually writing an article for Telfer and Shaughan about the lamenting the failure to bring through young players, because for a lot of the young players that were playing that season, only a handful of them would go on to do anything like worthwhile at the club. Thinking like, geez, even like Barry Mackay, maybe he had a pretty successful season. Lewis McLeod was ultimately sold to Brentford. Unfortunately, injuries curtailed his career. Fraser Aird had a good season that campaign. So there were there were some good young players in there. But I think that to play for Rangers, you need to have it takes a strong character to do that. And I remember writing an article for Telfer and Shaughan saying that, what if they just went and signed like the best players in the second division and had them on 2-year contracts and just went through and just used them to help get them where they want to be. Guys who would have been perhaps fans of the club, go and spend a couple of seasons there, help Rangers get to where they need to be, help bring through the young players, and then thinking, it's one thing playing for like Wraith Rovers or Partick Thistle with the degree of expectation that comes with that, but playing for Rangers is something different. And I think that if you don't have the personality to do that, then you're no use to anyone.
No, but they still sign players like Francisco Sandaza, who was fairly rubbish. Mm-hmm. So certainly, I do think their selection process could have been better. Put it that way. And you're right in terms of youth system. Like you're right. Like hardly anybody that played for them went on to have a decent career. And to be fair, that isn't necessarily something that you would. That's not necessarily the fault of the youth system at that point. But it is disappointing that they couldn't use that as a kind of breeding ground, I suppose, for players that would go on to become successful at Ibrox.
Yeah, I mean, we'll look at the squad. We've talked about the manager. We'll look at the team. And there were a number of players, good, high-profile players that left the club. They had the opportunity to transfer their contracts over to the new company, but declined. And those guys were Stephen Naismith, Stephen Whittaker, Alan McGregor, Kyle Lafferty, Steve Davis and Sonny Aluko. They all moved to clubs down in England. I think in Alan McGregor's case, he moved over to Turkey. And Kyle Lafferty went to Sion in Switzerland. And so those guys were always going to be a big loss because they're big characters and very good players, very good, hard-working, tenacious, industrious players, particularly in the case of guys like Naismith and Steve Davis.
Yeah, playing against Berwick though.
But these were the guys that moved on. I'm sure many of them moved on to protect their positions in the international. They don't want to be playing third division. I mean, as you say, you don't want to be playing Berwick Rangers every second week. And then there were some high profile players who stayed for about the initial 6 or 7 games but then moved on. Kirk Broadfoot, the guys like Doran Goyan, you remember him, big Romanian centre back. Mm-hmm. Carlos Bocanegra, think that he initially said that he was going to stay with Rangers in the third division, but Jurgen Klinsmann, who was his manager for the United States, said, we're not selecting you if you're playing Scottish third division football. So he went on loan to Racing Santander.
That sounds like you just made that up.
That's not. That's not. But I do remember. I spoke to you and Taylor about this just to run it, get his thoughts back. Because obviously, it's one thing us observing it, but he had a much more invested interest. And I think that the players, those players who did stay for a couple of games and then move on, weren't particularly good. Carlos Bocanegra, for instance, in the match against Peterhead, the 2-2 draw that opened the league season. There's a bit where Rory McAllister gets the ball inside the box, feints to shoot. Bocanegra slides in like his life depending on it. And then Rory McAllister deftly just ignores him. The guy, it's like something out of a Tom and Jerry cartoon. Slides out of the way, and there's Rory McAllister to shoot in tempting it. So,
really good finish. He should have scored in the first half. He has in the second.
So Bocanegra, not particularly good at that level. And then there were some high-profile players who would stay. That's like Lee Wallace. He ended up signing a 5-year contract with the club later in the season. Lee McCulloch, who, although I think he was 34 at the time, and I can't imagine there would have been many other clubs that would be prepared to match the level of wages that he was on at Rangers. Another one was Neil Alexander as well, who was a pretty useful goalkeeper.
Yeah, no, and that's fair enough. I suppose it's interesting looking back at when you go back to look at them, certainly away from home, and every single stadium was kind of rammed.
Yeah.
In terms of the away fans, and I suppose home fans looking to get one over Rangers. But no, it was just a weird kind of time. Like in terms of like Rangers dropping points against Berwick and Annan. That's really weird and will never be repeated.
You're skipping ahead, Shaughan, because we haven't even looked about. So those are the players that left. Those are the players that stayed. Let's talk about the players they brought in, because this is the good stuff here. This is the good stuff.
Who did they bring in?
Ian Black, right? Ian Black, whose last match was a man of the match performance in the Scottish Cup final for Heart and Midlothian in the 5-1 over Hibernian, briefly moved into painting and decorating to make ends meet during Hearts' financial issues under Vladimir Romanov.
Got a Scotland cap.
That's what I was going to say. Got a Scotland cap. He was called up for the 3-1 win over Australia in Easter Road in August 2012 and was booed onto the pitch as a late substitute.
Harsh.
I think at that point it felt as though I think that everyone was like really pissed off, or certainly the impression I got. Folk were pissed off that this guy's playing third division football. Why is he playing for Scotland? And I think the point was made that, well, he's been called up based off the back of the good stuff he was doing with Heart and Midlothian earlier in the season.
Last
season.
I thought the booing was more to do with the manager rather than Ian Black and who he played for. But certainly calling up a guy that played in the third division of Scottish football, I wasn't enamoured, to put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, they refused to call up Lee Wallace, strangely enough. I suppose this is a period where, I was going to say, Andy Robertson wouldn't have been in the team at that point. Who would have been at left fullback at that point in Scotland?
I don't know, but again, somebody who probably wasn't struggling against Peterhead.
Yes.
So I didn't really have an issue with Lee Wallace not getting called up.
I wasn't that fussed as well. That's just that if you want to stay at Rangers, and that's fine, because I think Lee Wallace was by far and away. I think that there's a lot of players at Rangers during those periods that really seem to get dragged down to the level. But I think Lee Wallace was one who was consistently pretty good.
Yeah, no, that's probably a fair enough point. You're right. You're right. He was consistently a wee bit better than third tier.
There was also Fran Sandaza, who you mentioned earlier, very prolific with St Johnstone the previous season. And I'd read this on Wikipedia. He had rejected signing a pre-contract with Rangers, and I think it was around January, February time. Didn't sign a pre-contract with them, but then said he was relieved not to be joining the club after they'd gone into administration, but then signed for them that summer anyway.
And then somehow got caught up in some kind of scam with a pretend taxi driver, and I can't remember. All very odd. I
think they're going to come to that in an next part. I think there's a whole episode dedicated to Fran Sandaza's prank call, but I'll leave that for Fowler to sort out. You had David Templeton, who had the previous season scored for Hearts against Liverpool in the Europa League playoff place, cost him £700,000. And I remember being quite disappointed in David Templeton. I was a bit invested in him, given the fact he'd been a Stennismuir player, and I really wanted to see him kick on and play for Scotland. And obviously, if you're dropping down into, well, I'll say obviously, I mean, Ian Black was called up. I thought by dropping down, then you're not likely to get the chance to do it. So I'm a bit disappointed in that. Someone has talent that was playing like that far down the food chain.
But that was one of the few players I thought that would drop down to bounce back. But that absolutely wasn't the case with essentially anybody. But I did think that would be the case with Templeton.
I think Templeton, what happened to him was just like really bad injuries at the end of the day that scarred him. There was another player, speaking of bad injuries, Kevin Kyle joined them, an outstanding centre forward, particularly with Hearts, very injury prone, and admitted that during negotiations with Rangers he picked an absolutely ridiculous number and almost got what he wanted. So you've got to say, like, fair play to him. It's a short career, try to maximise as much as you possibly can from it. And he just about did that. Ultimately, the season wasn't particularly successful for them. I think he left with about around February, March time that season. But on paper, it seemed like a smart sign, like a big guy who can crash into people and create space for others. I mean, he was like, listen to like Robert and Joel talk about him. He was absolutely a superb player for Hearts.
It very much felt like Rangers were tooling up for this season, but that's not how it turned out.
There's also Emilson Kribari, Brazilian centre-back signed from Cruzeiro, had played in Serie A with Napoli and Lazio, and also played in the Champions League.
Didn't work out.
Very soft. I remember that about this guy. Very, very soft. And the final player, Sean, is Sebastian Fauré, a French defender signed from Lyon. Now, his career at Rangers wasn't particularly memorable, but an interview he gave to the Mirror in January 2015 certainly was. This was when Rangers were in the Championship, and I think he was a bit scunnered by the lack of game time that he was being given. And so he spent the first part of the interview complaining about not playing for Rangers when they were struggling in the Championship. But it's really the second part of the interview that is really funny, when he talks about like working with what it was like to be at Rangers at that time. And just as I'm about to read some of the quotes out here, maybe Ally McCoist wasn't all that good a manager if this interview's to be believed. But he says, Rangers give their players plenty of freedom with how they look after themselves and what they eat. They don't look at what you have. There is a buffet and you can have second helpings. So as long as you perform on the pitch and don't put on too much weight, you can eat what you want. French coaches would blow a fuse with diet as players have over here. At Lyon, they set limits on what you could put on your plate. Before matches, we have a laugh and drink coffee in the dressing room. At half-time, Bill Elmosney and I, this is obviously Bill Elmosney would come and join the club later. Bill Elmosney and I reckon we're seeing things at times with everyone drinking tea. Ian Black is the expert with his cup of tea and little cakes at the interval. He goes on, so that's him talking about Rangers' dietary habits. When I was at Lyon, I couldn't even speak to the coaches, but here Ally McCoist even spoke French to me from day one of my trial. My Lyon bosses, Claude Poole and Remy Gard, would never have even eaten meals with their squad, but McCoist would shower together with his players. McCoist dropped his shorts one training session for the players to fire the ball at him. Bill and I fell to the ground laughing. A manager bearing his arse to the entire team. It was legendary. But coaches here know how to get things right. Jimmy Bell, the kit man, has been at the club since 1972 and used to help McCoist and Ian Durant when they were players. He is the soul of the club and a lovely guy, even though he keeps mouthing off. When I first came for a trial, I didn't speak English and he went on about the fucking French, but not in a nasty way. We have a laugh with him and he tells us lots of stories and jokes. He's worth his weight in gold. Our young midfielder Danny Stoney has a Rangers tattoo on his calf. That's amazing. I'm from Lyon and I support the team, but would never have a club tattoo done. If I'd gone through their academy with a Liam tattoo, they'd have called me an arse-licker. But here you are applauded for doing something like this. Ian Black has a tattoo of a Scotland national flag. I can't imagine anyone, least of all a footballer, getting a tattoo of the French flag, but it would be a good idea.
Rangers don't sound like a particularly well-run club.
Yeah, I'd like to retract the comments I made several minutes ago. And it's quite funny because Forey was quite a big fella himself. Quite like he looked like he was perhaps not in the best shape. Although maybe if you're allowed to go for second helpings and have cakes at half time, you're not necessarily going to be in the best of form.
Even if you aren't in the best of form, you should really run away with the fourth tier of Scottish football. But I'm sure it got to like October, November. They weren't top. Would that be right?
Oh, I need to check in that, Sean. Need to check. But just finally, before we go on and talk about the matches, we mentioned some of the young players: Lewis McLeod, Fraser Aird, Barry Mackay, Andy Little would have a really successful season. Guys like Kyle Hutton were there, played a lot of times, and Ross Perry. Do you remember him?
No, Dad, you better believe I remember Ross Perry. He was dreadful.
I see. He seemed to, and I'm sure Perry's a nice young guy and tried his best, but he never seemed to get a good write up any club he ever played at.
It's because he's not very good. Ultimately, like look, we can dress it up. He's not a very good centre half.
They also had Kane Hemmings at the club during that period.
Who is good.
Now, the thing is, Hemmings didn't actually play that often for the club. I think he made 5 appearances and scored once. But I remember watching the TV and thinking, he looks off a wee bit. However, he would actually go on to have a really good career. He'd be a legend at Cowdenbeath, played in a really good Dundee team that finished in the top 6. Lower leagues of England, still playing with Crewe Alexandra. So that's someone who did go on to make a name for himself. Yeah,
funnily enough, maybe out of all those players who haven't had a particularly good career in terms of we would know, he might have had the best career, actually, potentially.
Yeah, Barry Mackay, I suppose, is I know you didn't particularly do well at Wraith Rovers, but...
No, but in terms of... in terms of wages, they went down south, Fleetwood, then came back up. Let's face it, he's not done much, has he? So it'll be a coin toss between the two of them.
There was. You mentioned about the games as well, Sean. There was like a huge fascination from this. It was you only tend to see this when a large team is drawn against a smaller side in the Scottish Cup, but there was like international clamour to get in and see these Rangers games, particularly the games against Brechin City, the games against Peterhead that opened the season, of seeing Rangers, a team of their stature, playing in such small grounds. And while Rangers, like, you know, they could have been better given the resources and advantages they had over everyone else, in some degree of mitigation, and I'm going to use the term some degree here, so please forgive me, I think every single player they came up against raised their game by about 20-25% against them. Like, this was like every game was a cup final for these. You're laughing, but it's true. Everyone was trying so much harder against Rangers than everyone else.
Oh, come on. Regardless of that, Rangers should be winning at Peterhead or at Annan or wherever.
Yeah,
I'm Berwick.
Not disputing that. I'm not disputing. I'm just making the point that everyone was trying like an absolute bear against Rangers.
Listen, you can make that point, and I'll agree. But Rangers should have been winning. It was a very, very funny time.
It was, and I think it was supposed to be seen as a real financial boon for all the other small teams. I'm not 100% sure if that was the case. I think that because you've got bigger crowds, that comes with its attendant costs, and you might not make as much money from these games as you think.
Yeah, because suddenly you have to invest in the stewards, or you have to pay for the police. So you're right, it's not. I don't think it's quite the financial boon that's made out to be. And
these games on the television as well. So on like Sky Sports, you're getting like Rangers versus Elgin City on the games. It was a brilliant time. Well, I'll say it was a brilliant time. It was a strange time, and something like we're never likely to see repeated again. Now, we're not going to go through every match during the early run, but we are going to talk about some of the key ones. And the first one that kicked things off, Shaughan, it was a Challenge Cup tie against Brechin City at Glebe Park on the 29th of July 2012. And this is a match where famously a Doran Goyan clearance got stuck in the hedge.
And everybody looked really worried round about it.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose Rangers at this period, it was particularly in the early stage of the season, Ian Black was playing. He was registered. He wasn't properly registered. His paperwork hadn't gone through. He had to play as a trialist. But they think the Rangers couldn't list a full bench of players, and I think it was quite a sluggish performance from them in this one. They took a wee bit slow to get going.
Yeah, as I said, I thought they were. Going into this game, I thought, right, they're going to swat everybody aside. But watching the game, I realised that probably wasn't going to be the case. They weren't lucky, they weren't fortunate, but they certainly struggled to defeat Brechin 2-1. Yeah,
and it was Andy Little and Lee McCulloch got the goals there. Two players that would score more than 50 goals between them over the course of that season. East Fife followed up. They were easily beaten in the League Cup, and the Rangers they'd win 4-0 at Ibrox there. And the first game was against Peterhead at Balmoor. And in terms of where the contrast was in that old firm rivalry, at the same time that Rangers were playing Peterhead, Celtic were playing Real Madrid in a friendly in the United States. So there's an interesting contrast. And I remember seeing photographs. There was, I think Peterhead, certainly Peterhead's perhaps a Rangers-leaning town, I think it's maybe fair to say. There was banners over like the roundabouts, like welcoming Rangers into the town. And according to, I read an article from the Independent at the time, the players could not use the hotel the club wanted to book after the journey up on Friday because it was hosting a wedding. So there you go in terms of levels. And like you say, this game received international coverage. It was Barry Mackay opened the scoring for Rangers, and we touched on this goal earlier, Rory McAllister scored a fantastic equaliser, dumping Bocanegra on his arse before finishing. Scott McLaughlin put Peterhead up front with that. It was a really good goal. It's a corner cleared to him and he hit the thing in the half volley high into the net. And Andy Little got the equaliser in injury time. And if you're thinking that the Brechin game was like, they'll be a bit sluggish here, that Peterhead match was a bit of a Rangers are really not going to have things all their own way this season.
It's funny, so I worked in Tesco's at that point. I was a manager in Tesco, and there was a security guard who was a very staunch Rangers fan. And what I'd realised at this point is that there was only certain things that you could slag him about. And he didn't take it well at all. So months before, I was like, right, I'm not going to slag him about Rangers anymore because he doesn't take it very well. But I'd been keeping up with events with the Peterhead Rangers game, realised that it finished 2-2, and I kind of came out of, I think I was in the training room, skiving essentially to get the score. Came out of the room, and then he was there. Can't remember what his name was, regardless. But I had decided I wasn't going to slag him off in terms of Rangers because like his club had potentially like almost disappeared from existence, so I wasn't slagging him anymore. But I kind of looked at him, and it was so dishevelled. He was so disappointed at how far his team had fallen, and I started laughing. And he went, "You can fuck off." I went, right, okay, no worries. So I didn't really get a chance to slag his team, but it was just it was so dishevelled at how far his team had fallen from I don't know, winning leagues, winning cups, winning European Cup Winner Cups to equalising in the last minute against Peterhead.
And what this man didn't realise, it was going to get worse before it got better. Now, the following week, East Stirlingshire were beaten 5-1 at Ibrox, and then Falkirk were dumped out of the Challenge Cup, and it was followed up by a trip to Shielfield Park to play Berwick Rangers. Now, the last time the sides had met, they'd been drawn in the 2001-2002 Scottish Cup that finished 0-0 at Shielfield, but Rangers won the replay 3-0. And if you thought, well, they're not going to draw at Shielfield Park again, oh baby, they did 1-1. Then finished here. And the thing about this one, Shaughan, as well, just this is a sort of aside. These match highlights, which we found on YouTube, they start off with Lee Currie, who's still playing for Bornerick Rose. It's a terrible over the ball, straight leg, studs up tackle in Ian Black. It was only punished with a yellow card.
To this game was that famous Berwick victory in 1967 over Rangers, and Ian Black has been upended by Lee Currie. It's a poor challenge. Mike Tumilty's got a decision to make here. The Berwick midfielder clattered into Black. It does look as though it is just yellow. Studs were up.
I mean, in this day and age, I think that's a straight red. That's a straight red, but he was only given a yellow card and a talking to. And I think that Ian Black was dished out some absolute treatment over the course of that third division campaign.
It did feel like, and not rightfully so, that kicking Ian Black in the air was perfectly acceptable in League in Division 2, and that's not quite right. As much as it was funny,
it's not right. And obviously, there's an incident in a game against Stirling Albion, which I don't think we're going to get a chance to cover here. But I mean, it was like a Steve Blackman pump kick that he took in the chest, and it was just a booking. So yeah, Ian Black was absolutely kicked around. But this match, like Andy Little put Rangers ahead just before half time, but Fraser McLaren equalised just after the hour mark. Really well taken goal, and inexplicably, Chris Townsley, the big gangly defender, he put the ball in the net for heading home a corner right at the death. But the goal was disallowed, and there's an angle from behind the goals, and it's actually, I've watched it back like 5 or 6 times. I don't know what this goal was disallowed for.
Right at the death, Berwick Rangers have been denied what would have been a winner. There's no time left.
Aye, agreed. I mean, there should have been a winner. But here we are. But yeah, that should have been 2-1 to Berwick.
Yeah, I mean, it was Mike Tumilty was the referee, and I just remember him. I think he was a pretty bad referee. So it's I'd say it's good to know it wasn't just Dennis Muir that were on the end of some of his bad decisions. Now, Rangers would beat Falkirk for the second time in 9 days. He defeated them 3-0 at Ibrox in the League Cup. Elgin City were then brushed aside in Govan in the league a couple of days later. And then they took on Annan Athletic at Galabank, and this match would finish 0-0. It was a third consecutive draw away from home. Annan goalkeeper Alex Mitchell made a superb save at the end to deny Fran Sandaza. I think it was really clear at this point that Rangers were really struggling away from home. I mean, that was obviously the fact that they weren't taking their chances, weren't really creating chances. And I think that the small surroundings, the more modest surroundings, seem to be getting to the players.
Yeah, but to be fair, if you have a very well-paid group of players, then that shouldn't really be an issue. And ultimately, it didn't become an issue. But certainly at that point, there was how would you describe it in terms of it took them a while to kind of find their feet, I suppose, in the fourth tier.
Yes, McCoy said after this match, we're not starting games nearly quickly enough, and in the second half in particular, we didn't get the ball to the wide areas enough. And that was certainly exacerbated when David Templeton went off after 10 minutes with a ligament injury. I think he went down with no one around him, and McCoist blamed Annan Athletic's synthetic pitch at Gallowbank. And I think this became a recurring feature of Rangers' time in the lower leagues, where McCoist was, anytime, it didn't matter who they were playing, if they played on a synthetic pitch, regardless of what the result was, McCoist would make a comment about the condition of the pitch or the surface. Yeah,
they probably shouldn't though.
Yeah,
because ultimately a good synthetic pitch is far better than a bad grass pitch.
Yes, and Annan Athletic chairman Henry McClellan said, we're not very happy about McCoist's comments. He wants to take a closer look at the Rangers TV video. It is quite clear from the commentary that David Templeton was fouled, and only seconds before he went down, he was clipped by one of our players. If Manchester United and Chelsea can play a Champions League final in Moscow on an artificial pitch, the same as we have, I'm pretty sure 2 third division sides can at Gallowbank.
I feel like he's partially correct.
He's partially correct. I don't know if the folk at the Luzhny Stadium in Moscow or wherever it is came out to take a look at Gallowbank and were like, yeah, that's what we want. That's what we want for the big one. Now, Rangers were knocked out of the Challenge Cup 4 days later. They drew 2 each with Queen of the South and losing penalties. But got to say that was a very good Queen of the South team. That was Alan Johnson's team that had Gavin Riley, Nicky Clark, Mark Durnan, Danny Carmichael, etc. in them. But after they were knocked out, Montrose were scalped 4-1 at Ibrox in the league. And then came Stuart McCall's Motherwell in the League Cup. And I think this was, this was the first time that since having to start again in the third division that Rangers would take on an SPL club. And I think this would turn out to be one of Rangers' most straightforward victories over the course of the season. 2 goals in 6 second half minutes from Lee McCulloch and Dean Shields gave them the win. But I remember, and I had to check this with Graham Thewlis, Motherwell were absolutely pants that evening.
Yeah, but they were top of the league. Top of the Premier League at that point.
It made no sense. It was like, what Big Thewlis said was that Stuart McCall prepared his team like they were playing Rangers in the SPL days, where if you're going to Ibrox, you're in for a really, really difficult match. You're probably going to be backs against the wall. And he approached the game like that rather than taking it on the front foot like so many of other teams had done. Even the teams like the Shire and Montrose who got scalped at Ibrox, they still had a go. Motherwell didn't do that and were duly punished.
Yeah. But one of the few kind of straightforward Rangers wins over a team that I suppose was above them at the time.
Yeah, and I think fans were delighted, one, to get up an SPL team and get up the SPL itself. And I think that there was a feeling that the team could win maybe do a treble, win the League Cup, win the Scottish Cup, win the third division. And indeed, this gave some credence because the following week they took on Forest Mechanics in the second round of the Scottish Cup in late September, won that game 1-0. So there's Rangers, might have lost to Queen of South in penalties, unbeaten in the league, and then that would be followed up by another run-of-the-mill third division fixture against Stirling Albion at Fourth Bank. But that's a story for another day. That's a story for another day, but I think that's quite a good listen. That's a good getting a lay of the land for how Rangers got on when they had to play in the third division. Is there anything else to add to that, Sean?
I don't think so. I think we've very much set it up for the Stirling Albion game and how their manager approached it.
Yeah, nice. So I think that's a good time to call it a day. So thank you very much for joining us back in this podcast, looking back at Rangers Banter Years. Do get in touch with us to let us know if we missed anything out. I mean, this was a really remarkable time in Scottish football, for not just for Rangers, but for the wider game in general. And I've no doubt that we'll have admitted something worthwhile. So please let us know and help us fill in the blanks. The next part of this podcast series will be available very soon. But in the meantime, if you haven't already, do subscribe to the Terrace Patreon, patreon.com/Terrace Podcast. For as little as £2 a month, you can get world-class audio content about Scottish football and really help put bread on the table. Because I'm struggling just now. So thank you. So until next time, goodbye and enjoy your football, but please enjoy it respectfully. Thank you. Good night. God bless.